I'm Neil Dubord, Chief of the Delta Police Department. This week on our show,
either this is going to be too much and I'm not going to be able to survive this, or I'm going to have to start to develop a couple strategies to be able to navigate this.
Bend, don't break. This is a Delta Police podcast.
Hear more about how police officers strengthen their resiliency through the power of story.
First of all, welcome. So what did you... Tell me what the heck you had for breakfast, John.
Well, breakfast is an interesting thing for me because being a police officer, I'm on call 24/7 with the emergency response team. So it's typically whenever I wake up, and whenever I wake up, that's my breakfast time, but it's typically not in the morning. So what I will go for is my cup of coffee right away, and then I have a supplement called Greens Plus, and I'll have some Greens Plus with some glutamine, and I'll grab as much fruit as I can, and that's my breakfast. And I just start going.
And sometimes that's early afternoon.
It can be any time of the day. Yeah. That's how I start my cycle. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for being here. So today on Bend Don't Break, we're thrilled to be able to have John Musicco with us, and he's a Victoria police officer, an emergency response officer that we have been privileged to have the opportunity to be able to hear your story a little bit of what you've gone through. And I've certainly read your background, and I find it very, very interesting, and I'm anxious to actually hear from you of sort of that 3-year experience or 3.5-year experience that certainly I imagine will remain a big part of your life for the balance of however long you live. So thank you for being here. Welcome. And why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit about when you joined the Victoria Police Department?
Well, my hire date was back in 2004. And then I've been working nonstop with Vic PD since then. Yeah,
great.
But I wanted to just also start by saying thank you very much for having me here. It really is and truly is an honor. So thank you again.
As you know, certainly we try to benefit first responders and try to give them tips and strategies and ways people have overcome significant hurdles. And one of the hurdles that you're going to talk about today is certainly a significant one that just doesn't go away fast. And we often hear about the system, and we often hear about sort of the toll it takes on people's personal lives. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about sort of one of your aspirations, and one of your aspirations was to get into the emergency response team.
It was funny because policing for me as growing up was never a goal of mine, and it wasn't until I was finishing my university degree that I had to sit back and actually look at what I wanted to do with my life. And I had focused on psychology and a little bit of commerce, and somehow I had a light bulb moment, which was it's going to be policing. It wasn't an easy process for me. It's a long process, so it took about 2 years. I started with volunteering and became a reserve constable, and then I was fortunate enough to have an offer of employment with Vic PD. But once I got into policing and I started to see what was being offered, the emergency response team was something that really, really clicked with me. The tight-knit community of the team, and then the higher expectations as it relates to training and service is something that just really struck a chord with me. Yeah.
So you began in 2004 in Vic PD,
yes,
and then you joined the emergency response team when? They have a competition, I would imagine, and...
They do. As vacancies become available, yes, then they'll run selection process, and so my basic course was in 2010.
Great, okay. So in 2010 you joined the team, and is it all you thought it would be?
It's amazing. It really is. I'm very fortunate. I've had a very amazing career, and to be having given the opportunity to join that team and be part of it is something that I'm just very proud of. Yes.
Now, you were going to some good calls, I would imagine. You were going to some hot calls during that time?
Yes. It's one of the good things. It's a regional team, so it's integrated between Vic PD, Saanich Police, Central Saanich Police, and Oak Bay. So what the value is that if any one of those 4 different police departments have some type of critical incident that the team is required for, then we're going. So I'm not limited to what's happening only in Victoria, but I can actually spread out amongst the region. So it's a wealth of experiences, yeah.
Now, you're on the team and then you're back in patrol, and there's a bunch of sort of changes that happen between 210 and 214. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, it's a collateral duty. So what that means is that I'll have a primary responsibility at Vic PD, which for the most of my career was in patrol. So I was in patrol, attached to a patrol shift, taking and responding to 911 calls or calls for service. I would also carry a work phone and a pager that was associated to emergency response. And when the team got activated in response to a critical incident, then I would stop what I was doing and go. If I'm working, that's great. If I'm at home, then I stop what I'm doing and I head in.
So a huge advantage to your patrol teams because now you're specially trained and you have good awareness around those tactics that you can actually bring to all your colleagues on the street.
Yes, and Vic PD saw the value of that. So the members that are Vic PD members who are on the emergency response team were then assigned to a program called the Rapid Response Program. So they saw the value of this additional skills and all the training that we do and some of the equipment that we bring. And they put us in patrol attached to the shift so that we can help out in the event that there's a critical incident or some type of situation that would benefit from our skill set.
Now I'm going to bring you right to the fall of 2014, November. And I want you to talk a little bit about the call that comes in at that particular time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting set of circumstances if we look at my career pathing because I had done a lot of frontline policing in patrol and then be given an opportunity to head to a surveillance unit, which I jumped at, and it was a bit of a different type of policing. And shortly after being there, they revisited this rapid response program, and the mandate came that all ERT personnel must be back in patrol. So they came to me and said, you can either leave the team or you can go back to patrol. And I said, I'm not leaving the team, so send me back to patrol, please. And they did. And that was on October the 31st of 2014. Was my first day back after being away for about 18 months. I had been on the team for obviously 4 years. And so still, even though I'd been off the road for 18 months, I'd still had been exposed to a ton of critical incidents and a lot of frontline work. And then the next day on my second day shift is when the critical incident or the shooting that I was involved in took place.
So I understand it was a 911 call that came in that day.
Yes, it was interesting. So I was partnered up at the time with another member who was also on the emergency response team. Because I just come from the surveillance unit, I knew of a couple people that had some outstanding warrants for their arrest that were in relation to some past investigations that we had conducted. So it was a Saturday morning. We had gone for breakfast, and then I said to my buddy, "Let's go see if we can pick these people up on these warrants because they had failed to show up for court." So we were in an area of town that would be called like the north end of Victoria. And that's when the call for service comes in. It was a 911 call, and how dispatch brought it over the air is that it was a break and enter in progress. And typically with in progress calls, they would send it to my partner and I because of our skill set and the rapid response kind of mandate. When we heard it, we said, okay, we're going to start rolling, and we start pointing in that direction. It came in relatively on the lower end, as it was. I was under the belief that it's a break and enter, probably to an unoccupied house, and we're going to move in and start setting up some containment. So we let dispatch know that we're pointing that way, but we're coming from a bit of a distance. And then as we start driving, it starts escalating a little bit in terms of the volume of information and the type of information. It starts being included that the homeowner is actually home and that somebody is actually breaking in. So then we actually up our response and put the lights and the sirens on, and we start making our way a little bit quicker. Additional information comes in that it's a mother and it's her son that's outside. He's bound by a bunch of court conditions of a no contact with her and a no-go to the residence. He's now been able to get into the residence, and they're actually into some type of conflict in there. I was driving at the time, and I was working pretty hard to get us there, and I could actually start to hear a bunch of additional units that were just by circumstance a lot closer and ended up responding and getting there before we did. So I heard that they had got to the house, they had set up a little bit of containment, and then I think a couple of members had made their way up to the front door and had actually been in contact or in communication with the mother, and were able to get her out. I think it was about that time when my partner and I finally arrived on scene. It was interesting because the set of circumstances is something that I've responded to probably 100 times. So my partner, being in the passenger seat, was able to get out of the car a lot quicker to me and make his way up to the front door and link up with some of the other patrol members that were already there talking to the mother, and then ended up starting a dialogue with the suspect whose name was Rhett. So I took that opportunity just to step back and take a look around, and I started to launch into a little bit of a planning phase. And I wanted to see what was transpiring and then what some appropriate tactics and solutions were going to be to this type of problem. So I end up standing back on the front lawn of this house because it was at the mother's house, just this residential area. And I remember standing there and I'm watching my partner up at the front door. I can see the mother there, members with her. It looks like they had the front door open and they're in communication with Rhett, who's standing in a living room. So they have some distance between them and they're trying to talk to him. And as I'm standing there, I can hear a radio broadcast about a back door. So I say, okay, this is perfect time for me to start looking at the backside of this house to make sure that in the event that Rhett tried to flee, to avoid being arrested, that we would have this thing locked down and we would be able to essentially effect an arrest with proper containment. As I went around to the back, I started looking at some of the windows and ended up going up onto the back deck, looking through the back door. And what I saw there was an actual police officer standing inside of the house in the kitchen. So he saw me. We made eye contact and he walked over and he opened up the door for me. And I walk in and we have a quick conversation. How's it going? Good. I'm like, what do you got? And he's like, that's him over there. There's Rhett. And I look around the corner through the kitchen and through a small little choke point of doors and into a living room. And there's Rhett standing there with a knife. It was pretty close in proximity, so it took me by surprise, I should say, a little bit. So I started to actually develop some quicker plans because of the proximity and the tightness of the house there. So what ended up happening is a third police officer came in right behind me. So now we have 3 police officers in this kitchen area and another group of police officers at the front door, still trying to talk to Rhett. What was fortunate at that time is that the third member that came in with us had a less lethal option, which was a beanbag shotgun. So why that's valuable to me is that it's able to deploy like a less lethal projectile, basically like a beanbag or a hacky sack, so that we have some more tools in our toolkit. So he links up with us. We have a quick conversation about who's going to be who within this team of people. And I just take an opportunity to stand and just watch Rhett. And I can hear the police officers up at the front door trying to talk to him. And they're going through and they're saying the right things in terms of, we're here to help you. They're asking him to put down the knife because he's brandishing a knife, which I later learned that he had got from the kitchen itself. But he's not saying anything. So he's just standing there and he's just staring at the members at the front door. And I remember at that time, my stomach starting to sink a little bit because I'm looking at him, he's not talking, and I'm starting to identify that this is a bad sign. If he's not talking, then he's thinking about something. And I don't know what that is. And it actually just gave me a little bit of a chill. What I knew, though, is that our road supervisor was one of our crisis negotiators from our emergency response team. So my main goal at that time was to try and get that negotiator in to spell out the members at the front door, to try and actually have some better dialogue and use some different tactics in terms of communication with him. I needed to get him out of that cycle of not talking. And it was within about 2 seconds of me reaching up to grab my boom mic on my police uniform to make that radio broadcast for that request, when Rhett ended up running directly at the team of 3 police officers, including myself, with the knife. So I had previously mentioned that we had that beanbag shotgun. The member with it ends up deploying 1 round. It doesn't affect Rhett in the way that we wanted it to, which was to stop what he was doing. And he continued, and then I ended up shooting him once, which ultimately killed him.
Tell me a little bit about what's going through your head at that time.
Not a lot.
I can imagine, that the energy of the situation certainly drives the way we think. And right, it's tunnel vision at that point. Right? How do you save them?
It's interesting because audio, exclusion and tunnel vision are some things that do take place. For me, everything just slowed down a little bit. And I remember watching the police officer next to me deploy the shotgun. And then I remember looking back at Rhett, and then just I was able to essentially identify that this isn't working. And then now we're actually in very close proximity to each other. And then that's when I decided to fire. It was a bit of a surreal experience in a sense that everything just slowed right down. And the gravity or the reality of the situation took a little bit of time to actually sink in. And it wasn't until he ends up falling basically at my feet, and then the members that were talking to him at the front door end up coming into the living room. One of them was my partner, and then he can see that the reality is starting to sink in on my face.
And I think you had ambulance staged there, didn't you?
We did. It was one of the requests that our road NCO had made.
Very good.
Yeah. He's a very skilled NCO. He has lots of experience. He was a tactical member himself who had then transitioned over to the negotiator portfolio. So as these things are coming in, he's asking and making the appropriate recommendations and requests, which is one to have an ambulance in close proximity. Yeah.
So ambulance comes in. I know that your team starts to apply first aid to Rhett as well, and ambulance comes in, and unfortunately, you were unable to be able to save him at that particular time, and he passes away.
Yes.
So tell me the date again on that.
That was November the 1st of 2014.
Okay, so we're talking now, which is just over 5 years ago, basically.
Yeah, we just had the 5-year anniversary earlier this month.
Tell me about sort of, we're going to break it down into time frames, the immediate time after the critical instant. Tell me about sort of what happened with you and your family and, your headspace and what's going on through your mind and sort of the support you're receiving and how that's unfolding.
It's an interesting set of circumstances to be in because what transpired that morning is not a regular occurrence. I have been on hundreds of emergency response team activations that deal with some of the most high-risk situations in the region that typically result in a very peaceful outcome. So when we have a police-involved shooting that results in lethal force, it's outside of the normal realm of what your daily business is at Vic PD. So this was a first for a lot of people at the department and on scene, and so that comes with a bit of a learning curve. And I guess that's why we're here today, is to be able to talk about these things and learn from these experiences, so that when the next person goes through them, that they can hopefully handle it and have better experiences. Yeah,
I think you're so right. Over the course of the last 5 years, policing and I would think most first responders have advanced tremendously in relation to critical care. The mental wellness and the physical wellness, emotional wellness of our employees. And I think that 5 years ago we didn't have that level of sophistication. So. At the time, so the weeks after, what kind of care are you receiving? Are you seeing someone?
Well, it was interesting because the IO, so the Independent Investigative Office, obviously launched and took jurisdiction over this incident, and with that taking place comes a lot of additional steps where now lawyers are involved. So right after the shooting, I'm having to come over to the mainland to link up with a lawyer and start to prepare to give a statement to the IIO, which in itself was emotionally devastating. So the 2 days or 3 days after the incident, I'm sitting down, being recorded with investigators and having to go through exactly what we're doing right now. But I was deeply emotional at the time, and it was really challenging. So the first week was probably the hardest to have to connect with my family and start to understand what had transpired and the gravity and the tragedy around that. Yeah.
For those listeners that may not be from BC, in British Columbia and certainly Victoria, where John is from, is that we have several different processes that have to take place. The first one, whenever there is a critical injury or death, at that point in time, the Independent Investigation Office comes in and begins to do the independent investigation into the crime. or the potential crime. At that point in time, after they are done with the investigation, the Office of the Police Complaints Commissioner then does an investigation. After that, we could have a coroner's inquiry, and after that, you could have a civil suit. So there's 4 pieces that seem to take, a huge amount of time that cause stress at each time someone has to deal with it. So what we've heard about today is sort of the first step that you were dealing with, and that was the Independent Investigation Office and giving the statement, reliving that moment, having to work through lawyers, which is always difficult, necessary but difficult, and having questions in such a way that you start to begin to question yourself.
Yeah, it's an interesting experience because what took that place that day is typically, like I mentioned earlier, outside the norm. And it goes against a little bit of what our common practices are in policing, which is to conduct debriefs right afterwards. So I'm very used to, going on a call, coming back and let's talk about it. Let's see how we did. What happened over here? How are you doing? And then when we go through something with the gravity and the significance of what happened on November the 1st, the first thing is to say, listen, we need to start slowing this down. We're not going to have a debrief because we now have to go through these formal processes. And then like the first one that you're mentioning, which is cooperating and participating with the IAO. So when I responded and arrived on November the 1st, the timeline, and I may not have explained it or in a proper way, was about 2 minutes. So I was there for about 2 minutes and 45 seconds, and I was inside Rhett's house for about 45 seconds. And that's all I knew. I had never met Rhett before. I'd never met his mother before. So after going through this, I had a million questions that I was going to have to just wait to get those answers from, which was very, very, very challenging. Yeah.
Were you off work at that time? Were you on work? Were you seeing sort of a psychologist? What was happening with your family? Sort of all of that.
It's because we don't experience this very often at VicPD. Nobody really knew, or I didn't know, I should say, what to do after that. Obviously, I was off work, but the duration around that was kind of put back on me to say, listen, whatever, like, VicPD was very, very, very supportive, and I'm very, very fortunate of that. But it was put back to a point where it said, whenever you're comfortable to come back to work, come back to work. Well, I was in crisis mode and panicking, so I wanted to get back to work as soon as possible to start to try and get my life
routine, get back
to
with your colleagues, your friends.
Absolutely, and it's a huge part of my life, and it's a huge part of my social network because a lot of the members at the department are my friends. So you had asked earlier or just recently about counseling, and it started to become a little bit of a gift where we have to go for annual psych assessments and counseling as it relates to our tenure on the emergency response team. So one of the benefits is that I'd already have a counselor who I'd been going to for over 4 years. And so I had that relationship and that connection already developed. And that was one of the reasons I think I was able to get where I am today, is because I had that relationship already established, so that when I showed up on the first day of counseling, we didn't have to go through the process of saying, hi, my name's John, I'm a police officer and I'm married, I have 2 kids, and so on and so forth. We could actually get right down to business and talk about what I was experiencing and start working through some of the challenges.
Tell me sort of how your family's feeling.
That'll probably be a pretty tough one to touch on. My wife is very resilient, and my kids at the time were pretty young, so we had to work through trying to communicate with them what had taken place. which was challenging. It's very emotional, and as you can probably detect right now. So they were very supportive, very understanding, and I think as we worked through this, it was again like the counseling, one of the reasons why I was able to get where we are today. Yeah.
So how long were you off work? How long were you out?
3 weeks.
And did you come back too early?
Oh, absolutely, I did.
Yeah.
And this was a learning experience for myself, and it was a request, but by me to the department to say, hey, I need to come back to work. And in hindsight now, yes, it was too early. I would have taken a lot more time to actually digest and decompress after this. Yeah.
Did you take more time off down the road as this progressed?
No, it was an interesting thing. So what I knew is that these processes, these formal processes like the IAO and the OPCC, were going to take time. So I didn't know what the justification or the rationale would be behind coming back to work and then saying, hey, listen, I need to come off work and then I'm going to come back to work. And I was in fear that it was going to jeopardize a lot of my status and responsibilities. And I'm being a member on the emergency response team. It's only 16 guys. And when you lose one of them, it has a significant ripple effect for the remainder of the team. So I was probably overcommitted and pushed a lot of things or suppressed a lot of things internally to be able to remain dedicated to the job and to the team as well. Yeah.
How long did it take for you to get an answer from the IAO?
I think it was just about 2 years. So it was funny because you were asking about my family, and it took me actually fully breaking down to redevelop my mindset as to how I was going to I don't want to say get through this experience, but I would probably reword in terms of managing it. And it was right after my first day back to work where I was teamed back up with the same guy, the same partner, and we were back on the road. But everything had changed, and I remember him taking me out for coffee in the morning, and I was having a difficult time being in the coffee shop because of the proximity to other people and the volume of people around. And it was just I was just really struggling with it. So we had to go, and the calls for service they don't stop. So we're getting dispatched to different types of calls, and we're going to try and help people. And in the process of that, my anxiety and a lot of kind of physical heart rates are going up, and I'm trying to suppress them to just get through the day. And it was a lot just to get through that first day. And I probably should have listened to my body a little bit more, as it's telling me that I probably needed a little bit more time to be away from work. But that was a really hard first day because it also related back to my family and a lot of the circumstances of the actual incident, which is, if we step back and look at it, it's a son that's been taken away from a mother.
You said you had broken right down. Tell me about that.
Well, I was pretty exhausted after the first day, and then come home, and my wife was also experiencing a lot of challenges and had a lot of questions, and they were hard questions for me to have to answer. And what I was able to do was try and be there for her as much as I could, and she's not a police officer, and I'm the one that signed up for this profession. So I really looked at it to be my responsibility to try and be there as much as I could for her. But what ended up taking place was what we had just mentioned. The gravity and the weight and the seriousness of the incident just seemed to compile all at once on that evening. So, but at that point when I am able to, I push out to my garage. It's probably about 11 o'clock at night now, and I had converted my garage over to a home gym at the time, and that's where I finally had some privacy, and I was able to start to reflect on everything. And it was interesting to experience kind of where I landed at that point, which was either this is going to be too much, and I'm not going to be able to survive this, or I'm going to have to start to develop a couple strategies to be able to navigate this. So I ended up landing on two things that I felt were really going to kind of help me through this process, because as we mentioned earlier, this wasn't going to be over anytime soon. I realized that, and I knew that in order to start to survive this, that I was going to have to, like I mentioned, develop these things. And the first principle or strategy I landed on is that everybody's happy on their best day. And so I looked at it as this was going to be a significant challenge to my character. So when I was starting to experience a lot of these difficult times or tough days, is that I could directly relate it right back to a bit of a test of character. And then secondly, because of the pending time delay, which I knew was going to be into the years, is that I had to reframe that time period to look at it as a benefit to me. And initially, I think what my gut reaction was through this was to curl up and hide and avoid contact with people and not want to have to deal with this thing. So where I landed on it was that I need to go to the other end of the spectrum. I'm going to take this time delay to connect with as many people as I possibly can to, in a sense, not prove to the community or to the department, what it means to be a police officer. But I wanted to provide an additional stream of information so that when this thing came out through the IO or through the media, that people had connected with me and they had their own personal experiences, and to say that, I've met that guy and he did a great job, or whatever their experience was. So it was up to me to use this downtime to connect with as many people and do as much work as I possibly could.
So you remain at work. You took about 3 weeks off, remain at work. You're going through the IO. You've had this sort of, we've said hit the bottom sort of at that point in time, and comes a couple different strategies, which I'll come back to. And you just start plugging through the days, right? And plugging through the days, and 2 years later, you receive information from the IO. And what do you receive?
They come back with what they call their final report, and the whole basis, or the primary basis off of this, is to look and see if there were any criminal acts or criminal intentions. So they come back and deem that myself and any of the other police members that were involved that day essentially did what we were supposed to do, and there were no criminal intentions involved. But then that concludes one portion, and then opens up and launches into others.
Right. So it opens up the Office of the Police Complaints Commissioner. I was going to say the OPCC is what it's typically called here. And at that point in time, what's the media doing?
The media has been providing a pretty steady stream of content, primarily around the initial date, and then as the IAO is giving updates, they're reporting on that, and then as the final report comes through, then that becomes public record as well.
Did you have a good idea of the 3 or 4 different processes that were going to happen, or were you just sort of taking it one day at a time and moving forward?
Well, no, I knew about them. I was relatively familiar. Like I had mentioned, by this point, I had been on the job for 10 years. The IAO was relatively new at that point. I was quite familiar with the OPCC just from being exposed to policing itself. So it definitely helps understanding the process because that takes a lot of the unanswered questions away and the fears that start to develop because of that, which was probably one of the big learning points for me to take the opportunity before or prior to these types of situations to educate yourself on what the process is going to be, so that you don't have unanswered questions that lead into, because you will fill in those answers yourself. And typically they're not based off of the best case scenario. They're typically set off of the worst case scenario, and that feeds into anxiety, into fear itself. Yeah.
Now the Police Act or the OPCC comes back and says there's no Police Act complaints, there's no police officer misconduct, but then you roll right into another process.
Yes.
And that's the coroner's inquest.
Yes. It was interesting, though, because the OPCC didn't conclude their investigation. So they allowed for the coroner's inquest to go first. And they attended the coroner's inquest as well.
Interesting, okay.
Which added a layer of anxiety for me personally. But what I really struggled with, and the coroner's inquest sets up for it because Rhett's mom's there, and I felt a lot of guilt over the fact that I was internally struggling with this. But what I knew is that the pain or the discomfort that I was experiencing was probably pale in comparisons to what Rhett's mom or his family and friends are having to experience.
The coroner's inquest, how long? You're on the stand?
I was on the stand for half a day.
Half a day,
yeah.
Okay. And how long before the decisions came out from the coroner?
It was relatively quick. I would like to say it was within a week or even a couple of days, which was it was a big benefit for me not to have to sit and wait to hear where they were going to land on this or what the recommendations of that inquest were going to be.
Were you doing anything special at that time to try to remain positive?
It was coupled with a large amount of layering. So those two principles or priorities that I spoke about with this is going to be a test of my character, and that I need to use every opportunity to connect and to demonstrate what the capacity of a police officer is. So whenever I would struggle, I would just resort right back to those, and it didn't make things easier, but it helped rationalize a lot of the challenges.
Family, counselor, fitness, what about all those?
Well, if we're talking about people, what I started to understand is that I wasn't going to be able to, or that no one was going to help me, but I wasn't going to be able to do this by myself. And so when I say that, is that I go right back to that first day back to patrol, and that it was a very low period for me, and my only resource at that time was to pick up the phone and phone my counselor. Well, it's 11 p.m. at night on a Wednesday, and so it rings to the office line, and I have to leave a message, and then in 2 weeks I'm going to be able to get in and see her, which is why I knew that I had to develop those priorities pretty quick so that I could self-support myself, but I knew that just doing that on its own wouldn't be enough. And I can tell you honestly that the relationship that I have with my counselor, who I still see to this date, was invaluable. It really was. And then from that relationship and some of those experiences, I started to understand that I needed to branch out and connect with people because, my wife is there, and she's amazing, and she's going to be able to provide different things that nobody else can, love and personal contact. But I can tell you, after being on the job now for 15 years and working shift work for the majority of it, she would always ask me what time I'm going to be done work. Well, we work 6 to 6. Which is the answer is always the same for 15 years. It was always the same. So I knew that she wasn't going to understand a lot of what, or the inside of policing. So then I had to, or I put it to myself, to find somebody within the policing world that I could turn to and have police talk and challenges that I was experiencing that only a police officer would be able to understand and to help. And then I layered that with the counseling. So I had different resources depending on the different challenges that I was experiencing.
So let's just finish off on the coroner's inquest now. So the coroner's inquest completes and the recommendations come out, which certainly had sort of nothing for you to follow up on. So you can just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's interesting because within the inquest, the jury is made up of members of our community. So it was a hard process to go through where it's more informal than a normal courtroom in a sense that there's different parties that are invested in it. So Rhett's mom is there, the coroner is there, and then different counsel are there. And at any time, different lawyers or members of the jury can stop and ask questions, and we have to kind of talk through that. So it was a challenge, but at the conclusion of the inquest, they make a determination on the cause of death and then make a bunch of recommendations based off of that to try and prevent anything like this from happening again.
Absolutely. So I want to sort of just try and pull this a little bit together here. And I think I've heard you say a number of different things, and I just sort of want to walk through this and correct me at any time if I've got it wrong. The first thing I think I really took away that is really valuable is that, and I've heard it from a lot of people that we've spoken to on this podcast, is that most people hit bottom at one point in time, and whatever that bottom looks like. I mean, that's how it's explained, but you come to this moment of clarity where you're completely vulnerable, and all of a sudden you need to figure out a way to get out of it.
Yes.
And sometimes those paths can go in two different directions. As we know, it can be, this is hopeless, or it's, I'm going to figure out a way out. And certainly you came to that moment of clarity in your garage at 11 o'clock that night after your first shift back. So it's funny how that happens. The second thing I heard you say really loud and clear is that you would give people, if you could coach people on this now, it would be tell them to be proactive. Proactive around getting to know someone that you speak to. We take care of our physical health by going to the gym, take care of your emotional and psychological health by going to see a counselor or a psychologist, and do that in advance of the time you really need it.
Right.
Don't wait till the last moment.
If you think about, some tough times in your life, that's happening because of a reason. So why would you want to add onto it the challenges of having to go and find a practitioner in terms of a counselor where you're having to go to Google and start looking up names and seeing who works with you, because it really is a bit of a personal connection. So take the opportunity prior to when you're in distress or in tragedy to identify who that network's going to be for you in terms of a counselor or other types of support. Set it up so that when you need it, it's right there, and then you can actually start to talk about and deal with the things that are causing you problems.
Absolutely. The next thing I heard you say, which is in relation to being proactive as well. So I want to capture it under being proactive, is the fact that it's important for us to understand the process, to be able to take away the fears and do that before you're actually in the process. So understand what happens at the IIO, understands how the OPCC work, understands a coroner's inquest, understand what might happen in civil litigation. But if you're already in it, it's harder to understand.
It really is, because, and we mentioned this, is that when your brain's scrambling and trying to find answers, that you will fill in those holes yourself, versus having the answers that are accurate and correct, and then you can now start to anticipate what the next step is. So I'll tell you, God forbid I ever have to go through an experience like this again. I will be better the next time around, because I know exactly what is required of me and when it is, and what I need to do throughout that process.
Well, I hope others can learn from it rather than you again. That's,
yes,
that's for sure.
Yeah. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. So,
talking about the process and my personal experience, and obviously ours is a little bit different, but it's a long process. And one of the big issues that I found, and kind of sounds like it was a little bit the same for you, was is we can't talk about what was going on, but the media still rolls out the stories, and people add their opinion about this you as an officer and what you did, whether it's right or wrong, and they have their opinion, and then you have to mitigate your family's opinion, because now they're reading these stories, but you really can't tell them a lot of, you tell them little tidbits, but because I remember having these questions from my family going, well, what actually happened? Like, are you, like, I'm like, don't worry, it's like, everything I said has happened like this. And I don't know if that was the same for you, like because they don't really they get information from the media, and you can only give them little bits, and again, they start filling in those little gaps as well with whether it's right or wrong. And I found that really tough.
Bringing your family and your friends in on what the process is and educating them will help out and pay off in dividends. It really will, because I can tell you that when I'm coming home after this incident and I'm having to tell my family that I got to go link up with a lawyer. I'm going to be over on the mainland, and then they're wondering, why do you need a lawyer?
Panic.
What did you do? What did you do wrong? That's going to require the advice of the law. So if you can get ahead of that and say, listen, this is a matter of process, and God forbid we're ever involved in this, this is what we're going to expect to experience. And so when it starts to happen, this is okay. Well, this is the norm. Yes. You went through this. We're going to get you in touch with so-and-so, and then start to work towards.
Absolutely.
That's great advice.
So I just want to capture two more things that I think that are important for us to talk about. The first one is that your strategies, right? It's a test of your character, recognizing that and say that no one is going to impact your character. And if anyone's going to have a narrative on your character, you're going to set it. Yes. And you're going to set it by your second strategy, by being able to connect with as many people as possible. Yes. You're right. Most people want to curl up and they want to hide in their house and not be seen by anyone. But you have to make an effort to get out there and control whatever narrative you can around your own personal character. And then finally, I think that you gave another real good piece of advice about layering resources and knowing what resource you need for what information you can talk about. Policing, whether it be ERT stuff, you can talk to your ERT people. And for policing, it can maybe be HR people. And for family life and kids and all that busyness we have, it can be your family. But you need to be able to layer those resources according to whatever you need to talk about. Not everyone can do everything.
No, not at all. I don't think it would be fair to put it all on one person as well. And being able to connect with different people are going to provide different feedback and different experiences that I think that then you're going to be able to start to grab from and then use, depending on what your needs are.
Absolutely. So be proactive, learn about the process, get a counselor ahead of time, develop some strategies, whatever strategies work for people. And yours was test a character and making sure that you were out in the public and communicating and connecting and building relationships. And finally, having layered levels of resources. Those are all gold.
You're tremendously courageous and brave. Thank you for being here. It's been an amazing time for us to be able to grab some really good key points that I think we can share with other people. And I'm going to turn it over to Aaron for any sort of comments or final conclusion questions.
No, I just echo the same. I appreciate you making the trip over here.
Yeah.
It's an awesome, you're a great storyteller, and you've got some great points there, and I really appreciate you having the courage to come here and share your story, because it takes courage to share your story. So.
Yeah, it's really hard, and that was part of the justification, in the back of my mind, is that there will be the next member, the next family, or the next community that has to go through a tragedy. And if we can be learning and be developing, skill sets and strategies to not make things better, but to try and improve and move forward, then there's value in that. Yeah.
Let me guarantee you something, John. Your conversation today will have impact with someone, and it will change someone's life. So thank you. All right, so I'm going to end here tonight, as we end with everyone. And at the Delta Police Department, we don't have challenge coins, but we have commitment coins. So it's commitments to people who have a commitment to our profession or to our community. And we only printed 100 of these, and we're getting down to, and I think we're getting well into the 80s now. So anyways, you are one of the people that we want to be able to give this to for your commitment to policing and the profession. So thank you so much for all
wonderful.
you do.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
These productions never come without a lot of work from everyone involved. A big shout out and thank you to Constable Aaron Hill, Melissa Granum, and Nikki Hewitt for producing and recording, and of course post-production done by Podfly. Next week on Bend, Don't Break.
I'd come home and I'd sit on the couch, I'd open a beer or a bottle of whiskey, and my son would be trying to get my attention, and he'd be 10 or 12 times trying to get my attention, calling my name. Dad, 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 over and over and over again, until my wife finally goes, hey, your son's trying to get a hold of you, and she has got to yell at me from across the room. And then I come to snap to it and kind of pay attention.
For more episodes, you can find us on iTunes and Google Play. If you have a story to tell, go to deltapolice.ca/podcast to submit your idea. Don't forget to subscribe to and rate our podcast. And if you want to connect, we're on all major social media platforms. Once again, thanks for tuning in.